Okay, we might finally have the audio issues resolved here on the Morning Pit. I don't feel like yesterday was exactly where I wanted it to be. Hopefully today is a little bit more in line with, the whatever standards we've established along the way. Hopefully today is a little bit more in line. But we know what today is. Today is the Morning Pit Mailbag, best day of the week. It's Friday. Everybody loves a Friday. And everybody loves the Morning Pitt Mailbag. Hopefully everybody loves the Morning Pitt Mailbag. I love the Morning Pitt Mailbag because you guys give us questions, and I answer as many as we can in the 20 minutes or so that we do this show. So thanks to everybody who participates in the mailbag. If you want to be part of the Morning Pitt Mailbag, the way to ask questions is you go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. You post your question there on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board. We've got a thread that we start every Tuesday or Wednesday. You dump your questions in there, and we answer as many as we can. We try to save some of those and use them the next week if we need to, but we'll get to as many as possible. We've got some great questions this week, a lot around spring ball, some around basketball. One way or the other, we're talking about Pitt sports and taking your questions. So let's dive into it, the Morning Pitt Mailbag right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, the Morning Pitt Mailbag here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Of course, I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below. You should go check it out. Panther-Lair.com on the 24/7 Sports Network. We're excited to have you here. We're excited to be on the network. And if you want to check out the best Pitt coverage from spring camp and the basketball portal and all those different things that are going to be happening, the place to do it is at Panther-Lair.com. Head over to that website, Panther-Lair.com, to get all of your Pitt sports coverage. And that's where we take these questions every week to fill out the mailbag, and let's jump into it here. First question comes from Evan Man Pitt. Says, which position group or groups do you believe will be the unsung heroes in making a big impact on Pitt's season this year? For football, he's talking about. First of all, it's funny, we use the phrasing unsung heroes. And it's funny, I always think when we get questions about unsung heroes or guys nobody's talking about, things like that, because, the nature of what we do at Panther-Lair.com and on the message boards where you have some of the most dedicated Pitt fans you're going to find, and everybody's like diehard about Pitt and really into Pitt, like there's not a lot like under the radar. Like there's not a lot of unsung heroes. We talk about every guy in every position group all the time. So it's not like, hey, I'll tell you somebody that nobody's talking about. Like, who would that be? We talk about quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, offensive line all the time. We talk about the defensive ends, defensive tackles, linebackers, cornerbacks, and safeties all the time. For me to sit here and say there's an unsung hero, I'm not sure who that would be, because I think we all have a pretty strong feel, for the pulse of the team. Now, which position groups are obviously are going to make a big impact on the team and the season this year? Obviously, the offensive line is right there at the top. Their success, their ability to stay healthy, their ability to play well is going to, that's paramount to the team's success this season and what they're able to do. They need to play well on the offensive line. They need to keep their starting five on the field, and if they have to go into the depth, then those reserves have to play well also. And so that's sort of a no-brainer, but that kind of ties in with everything I'm saying, that, it sort of feels like we know all the groups. I think there are some position groups that are going to be particularly strong. I think the linebackers will be really good. I have high expectations for the safeties as well, with Javon McIntyre and Cruz Brookins, and even the guys behind them, Jesse Anderson and Kavir Baines-Marquez, who came in as the transfer, and even Alan Bryant, who is a redshirt freshman this year, who I think is probably going to be pretty good. I've heard a lot of high praise for him. It's very early to comment on the defensive line so far. I like how some of these guys look physically. The transfers, Blaine Spires and Joey Zielinski and Jaden Moore, and even the freshman Juju Anderson, who, probably won't make an impact this year as a true freshman at defensive end, but looks promising. From a physical standpoint, looks promising. Is there a group that I think will, let me get back to the exact wording of your question. Which position groups do I believe will be the unsung hero in making a big impact on Pitt's season this year? I think, again, aside from the offensive line, I think the wide receivers have a chance. I think Kenny Johnson needs to have that breakout season, and if he does, it could be, I think it could be a really big year. I think Andy Jean is really intriguing, in addition to some of the other guys who are coming back, but can't say my expectations are too high for the offense or for the wide receivers, but maybe they can surprise us a little bit in that regard. But ultimately, this season's success is going to come down to the offensive line and how well those guys play, how well they play together, and how much they're on the field together is ultimately what's probably going to determine this season. Litchfield Tower A says at the beginning of the transfer portal window, there was some talk about Pitt going after a backup quarterback. I think Anthony Calandria from Virginia even came on a visit. It seems like Julian Duggar's performance in the bowl game has established him as the solid number 2 behind Eli Holstein, but how much confidence do you think the coaching staff has in Duggar if Holstein gets hurt? Starting David Lynch over him and pursuing backup options in the portal isn't exactly an overwhelming vote of confidence, although that was before Duggar had a chance to play. Is the staff sold on Duggar after the bowl game, or is there expected to be an open competition for QB2, and or are they still considering going after another quarterback in the portal? Do you expect to see packages designed for Duggar to utilize his athleticism even if Holstein is healthy and playing? So Pat Narduzzi was actually asked about this yesterday, was asked about Julian Duggar, and I'm trying to find the exact quote here. Pat Narduzzi was asked, is Julian Duggar the primary backup to Eli Holstein? Is there any thought of maybe putting in special packages for Julian in the offense? Narduzzi's response, quote, you saw the bowl game, right? So yeah, there's no question about it. They'll have to defend him in the run game, and he hurt you in the pass game too. So, there's always going to be a special package for him. I think they are confident in Julian Duggar being the backup quarterback. I think they did. I think the way you laid it out is exactly what happened. They looked for a backup quarterback. They brought in some options as a backup quarterback. They went after Calandria, like you mentioned, from Virginia. I think they went after, what was his name? Cole Gonzalez, Cade Bell's old quarterback at Western Carolina. They tried to bring in that veteran quarterback, but like you say, I think that was before the bowl game. And I think Julian Duggar opened some eyes. I mean, they certainly did not have high expectations for Duggar. That's why David Lynch was starting. That's why David Lynch was the number 3 quarterback, ahead of Ty Diefenbach as well, if you recall. And then once Diefenbach and more importantly Nate Yarnell went into the portal, they thought they needed to go get a veteran quarterback. Then they go into the bowl game. They start Lynch. They're sort of forced to put in Duggar because Lynch was really not playing well. And it turns out, shock of all shocks, Duggar's actually really good. And I think, I'm not going to sit here and say I was pushing for Julian Duggar to be the number 2 quarterback all season or something like that. I'm not going to get revisionist. I didn't think he'd be ready as a freshman. I had high hopes for his future and high expectations for him, but I didn't think he'd be ready as a freshman. But he goes in there in the bowl game and absolutely looks like he can do the job, particularly after another offseason of training and practicing and learning and studying and everything like that. I mean, he made some mistakes. He threw a pick 6, but he also made a lot of plays to help Pitt win that game, and I don't think he was the reason they lost that game. I think if they had held on, if either he doesn't throw that pick 6, or maybe if Isaiah Neal catches the pass from Gavin Bartholomew, Julian Duggar very well could have been the MVP of that bowl game. And so I think they do have confidence in him as the backup quarterback. I think they will look at a package for him. I don't know if they would try to get that package in the middle of games. I think coaches like the idea of that more than the actual execution of doing that kind of thing, of having a package for a quarterback and, taking your starter off the field at some point in like the second quarter or the first quarter or the third quarter or fourth, especially not in the second half, taking your starter off the field to run a possession with your backup. Coaches like the idea of it, but I don't think they do it as often as you would think, given how much they say they like the idea. Just because you get it, you start feeling like every possession is so valuable, you can't possibly take your starter off the field. But I think, the main point is, would they be confident with him as the number 2 quarterback? And I think they would. I think they should be confident about it, and I think they would be confident about it. So I don't really see them going after another quarterback in the portal unless it's, you remember they got the guy from Dartmouth like 2 years ago or something like that? Something like that. If there's an Ivy League guy who goes in the portal after the spring, maybe not looking for a starting job or maybe even to be the backup, I think that I could see them pursuing something like that. But I can't really see them going out and trying to find someone because they feel like they need a new backup quarterback. I think they've got confidence in Duggar, and they should have confidence in Duggar. If they want to go get a transfer out of the portal, it would have to be someone you'd be envisioning as your number 3 quarterback, so you don't have to go to David Lynch again or Mason Heinschel, the true freshman. Big Husky 34 says, former SV Pig 1 here. Is it crazy to say that basketball's biggest flaw this year was the lack of a legitimate three-point shooter? Or do you think Lowe and Corin shoulder more blame? There's a lot. There's a lot that this team struggled with. They struggled to close out games, and there's a variety of reasons why they struggled to close out games. They were a bad rebounding team. And, that has nothing to do with the three-point shooter. Unless you want to say, well, if you have a guy taking more threes, you're going to create more rebounding opportunities for your guards, which is ultimately where Pitt needed the rebounds to go, to the guards, because the bigs couldn't rebound. And that was a bigger problem, I think, than anything. Well, not anything, but, it wasn't a majority of the problems, but it was, a plurality of the problems were tied around the rebounding on both ends of the court. I mean, there were games where they got killed because they couldn't get a defensive rebound. They gave up too many offensive rebounds and too many second chance points in multiple games. This was an issue that dogged them all season long. And so by that, in that regard, Cam Corin was the biggest issue, and Guillermo Diaz-Graham was the biggest issue. And I know maybe Diaz-Graham is a better rebounder than Corin, but neither one of them is all that great. And so they were not a good rebounding team on either end of the court, and that was a big problem. Jalen Lowe averaging 3 turnovers per game and shooting like 26 or 27% from 3 was a big problem. Cam Corin not being able to rebound or defend very well was a big problem. Probably, consistent set of bad decisions about what to do at the center position was a big problem. Some of the other personnel decisions, like not going with 3 guards more often, which was influenced by Damian Dunn's injury, but it's not entirely tied to that. That was a big part of the problem. So there were a lot of issues. I don't know if the lack of a three-point shooter was a bigger issue than Jalen Lowe's turnovers and shot selection. I don't know. I don't think it was a bigger issue than the rebounding. I don't think it was a bigger issue than some of the decisions that were made at the center position overall. So it was a problem. I mean, it's always better to have a great three-point shooter than to not, but I think they had enough guys who could make threes. Zach Austin could make threes. Guillermo could make threes. The 2 guards, Lowe and Leggett, can make threes. And then obviously you have Cummings, Jorge, and Delilich on the bench who can all make threes. So they didn't have a Blake Hinson. They didn't have an Ashton Gibbs or a Ronald Ramon, three-point specialist type of guy. But I think they had, enough shooting that I wouldn't say that was the biggest problem. Certainly not ahead of some of those other things, particularly the rebounding. Infinite Highway says, any chance they move back to a pure offense versus defense style of spring game? It seems like this would be a good year to keep most of the starting offense together with a lack of quarterback depth and the rebuilding of the offensive line. No, I think and Panaruzzi basically said yesterday that they're going to draft again. So I think they'll have the mixed teams like that. My guess is they'll do what they did last year, which is place the offensive line units on the teams. So like first team O-line is over here, second team O-line is over there, rather than drafting out that was the biggest issue with the draft in the past. I think what made it such a disjointed product on the field was that they were drafting the offensive linemen individually. And so you get these mismatched, I should say, offensive line groups of guys who didn't really play together and didn't really have that kind of cohesiveness. And that made it all kind of fall apart as much as anything, more than anything. That made it all fall apart. And I think they resolved some of that last year. Not that the final product was all that great, but it was, at least they took care of that offensive line issue. I think they'll stick with the draft. I think they'll stick with blue versus gold, and winner gets winner gets steak and loser gets hot dogs and all that stuff, because I guess that's fun. It seems like the players enjoy it. But I think they'll probably, or they should probably, stick with the drafting the offensive line as a unit, which I think worked a little bit better last year. Zenmeister1992 says, which position group do you have the most excitement in watching when it comes to the spring practices and eventually the spring game? So I'm going to take that to be a question about my general sort of practice viewing habits and spring game viewing habits more than, specific to this year's team and roster. I think when you watch a practice, and we don't get to see a ton of it, but when you watch a practice, there are different drills that are going to emphasize different position groups. And so I got a few videos yesterday of the defensive line working through drills. We'll put that video out today or this weekend of the defensive line working through drills and getting into that kind of thing. And there's some D-line drills that can be a lot of fun to watch. When they hit the sled and push it across the field, it's pretty funny because the guy who stands on the sled will usually talk a little stuff, and then they'll take him for a ride. Obviously one-on-one drills would be great to see. We'd love to see some cornerback versus receiver drills. Those are always fun because you get to see the quarterbacks throw. You get to see the receivers make plays. You get to see the corners defend, or safeties and running backs, tight ends. All those guys get mixed into those one-on-ones. We love watching those kind of drills, but we don't get to see them all that often. I think so. You have to pick and choose based on which drills you're getting to see. When you get to the spring game, I think you want to see receivers make big catches. Probably the biggest thing. Like, big hits are cool, but you don't really want to see too many big hits when it's your team playing against your team. Like when they're playing against their teammates, you don't really want to see them take each other's heads off or lay a big shot on a defenseless receiver or something like that. And so you kind of rule that out. You don't really want them getting too physical up front because, again, you don't want anybody on your team to get hurt. But, like, receivers can make big catches, and that's exciting, and that's fun to watch. Running backs breaking big runs. Those are the kind of things. I mean, you want you want those kind of plays. That's what you want to see. That's what you look forward to, and that's the kind of thing that can make you come out of the spring game and be like, wow, this guy's going to be really good. He can get downfield and make big plays. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to. It's the kind of thing that you like to see during practice, and then the kind of thing that you look for in the spring game. Atwood409 says, do you think they throw more NIL and revenue sharing at the basketball program to see if that can fix the problem? Or are you hearing they're just going to let it sink? No, I don't think they're going to let it sink. I think they're going to try and fund it as much as they can. I think they're going to try to get what they can revenue, in terms of the rev share. I think they're going to try to make sure the program has the NIL resources necessary to get the players they need, or as many as they can, in order to, make the team stronger for next season. I've always said this. I think, if you're an AD and you're dealing with a struggling coach, I don't think the solution is to sort of cut off resources. And I can understand you say, well, why would you throw resources at a coach who's struggling if you don't believe he's able to get it done? Yeah, maybe at a certain point you come to that point where you say, all right, I'm done throwing money at this. But I think you give the coach an opportunity. If you believe that coach can be the one to help you win, then you give him all the opportunities you can. You give him the resources you can, whether it's NIL or it's facilities or whatever it may be that he feels like he needs, so that when the day comes, if the struggles continue, the coach can't turn around and say, well, we would have won if you would have done this for us or done that for us. You want to be able to walk into the coach's office or vice versa and say, listen, you said you needed A, B, and C. We gave you A, B, and C, and we actually gave you D and E also, and you still did not produce success for us. And that's why we have to move on here. I think you have to give the coach an opportunity to win, and if he fails with that opportunity, then that's when you cut ties. But I don't think you just let it sink and go down on its own. TPFKA _JD. It's a lot of things there. It says, questions on Eli Holstein. Do those around the program see a noticeable difference in his development, and what impact does that have on the team's offensive strategy? I.e., will we see the full Cade Bell tempo offense this season? I've only talked to a few people around the program. I think there's a feeling like he came into spring camp more confident, not just in his ability, but more confident in the offense, more confident as a leader, more confident as a guy who could speak up and try to lead the offense, lead the team, as he should. He was a starting quarterback last season. He learned a lot, he showed a lot, he played a lot, and he made a lot of big plays. And so, I think it makes sense that he would come into spring more confident than he was a year ago, and I think they've seen that. As far as Cade Bell's tempo offense, I think they used it when they could last year, and when the offense was struggling, they had to be sort of mindful of the fact that they were throwing the defense back on the field every 3 plays, and so they had to slow down a little bit, particularly late in the season, because I think the defensive players were getting gassed by all the 3 and outs, basically. And so they had to be mindful of that. Now, if you can use the tempo and score touchdowns, you keep doing it. They obviously ran into a problem with that in the second half of the season, and they weren't totally consistent with it in the first half of the season either. But I think, I don't think it will change the philosophy or approach, but I think there will be an expectation that they can operate this offense at a higher level in year 2 with Eli Holstein and year 2 with Cade Bell. Everybody having a second year in this offense. For UP H2P says, when do you answer these questions? Do you post them here or YouTube? I know they have to cut a few walk-ons to get down to the 105 limit, but do you see them adding a late portal player or two? If so, what positions? We answer the questions right here on the Morning Pitt Mailbag. We release this every Friday morning. I think it usually posts on YouTube at like 5 a.m. And then we'll post it on the site on Panther-Lair.com a couple hours later. It'll show up on the message boards. It'll be on the front page of the site. We do have the audio podcast as well. There's a lot of ways to get the answers to the questions. We'll try and direct you to them when the time comes. As far as adding players after the after spring camp and that spring portal window, I think they'll try. I think they'll always. Every coach in America will probably feel like they could use another offensive lineman, and I think Pitt will probably try to get another one. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to get like a defensive tackle or something. The problem, largely because their numbers are low. They've got 6 scholarship defensive tackles in training camp, or in spring camp right now. They'll add one more in true freshman Trevor Summers coming over in the summer. But that's not a lot in terms of numbers. And so maybe they'll feel like they need to add one more. The problem is when you get into these spring editions, and I've said this a lot of times, it's a seller's market. And you're probably going to pay more for a player you would have paid less for in the winter, if that makes sense. And so I think you have to be smart about how you invest your resources. You don't want to overpay, because a lot of schools that are looking for players in the spring portal window are doing so because they're desperate. They're acting out of desperation. They had a bad injury in the spring, or they didn't get the guys they thought they would need, or didn't get the guys they needed in the winter, portal window. And so now they're last minute shopping to try to fill out the roster. And I think the players are able to command a little bit more in terms of NIL during this portal window. So you have to be smart in your shopping, so to speak. I think they will try to get some guys, but it's also debatable about how much of an impact they'll make. So we'll see. I think they'll try, and they'll probably bring in a couple of guys because they do have kind of unlimited scholarships. Jay Leisinger says, I mentioned this in another thread, and I realize this is an oversimplification, but just looking at who is in versus who is out from the portal. Hold on. There we go. Just looking at who is in versus who is out from the portal, do you get a sense it was a net positive? We had 2 players leave for Power 5 programs and 6 come in. Thoughts? Let me bring up the transfer tracker here. We always have it pinned at the top of Panther-Lair.com. So Pitt lost. Jordan Bass went to Virginia Tech. Sincere Edwards went to UCF. And Rylan Gandy went to Indiana in terms of power conference schools. Pitt brought in Deuce Spann from Florida State, Jaden Bonsu from Ohio State, Andy Jean from Florida, Jaden Moore from Oregon, Blue Hicks from Louisville, and Jeff Percy from Michigan. So in terms of destination and origin schools and being power conference schools, Pitt would be a net positive. I look at it more like, I can't just break it down like that, because I agree with you. I do think it is an oversimplification, because some of the guys who would transfer out of a power conference school are likely doing so because they weren't getting the playing time they wanted. Now, maybe that means they were stuck in a difficult depth chart. Maybe that means that they just needed a better fit or better, something like that. But a lot of these guys just weren't playing. You know what I mean? Like, you look at the list from Pitt, right? I mean, like, guys left Pitt. Rodney Hammond went to Sacramento State. Noah Bigelow went to Louisiana Tech. Nakai Johnson went to Tulsa. Montravius Lloyd went to Bethune-Cookman. Jeremiah Anglin went to Benedict College. Like, is Benedict College sitting there and saying, man, the transfer portal was a boon for us because we got a guy from Pitt? Well, that guy from Pitt wasn't playing. That guy from Pitt wasn't contributing or doing much or having, Norfolk State got David Ojebwe. Are they sitting there saying, we got a guy from Clemson and Pitt? That is huge. So it's not as easy as just where did they come from and where did they go? No, I look at, in terms of what they lost and what they added, I look at the impact. You know what I mean? Like, I think when you look down the list of the transfer departures, there's 3 guys, and they happen to be the guys who went to the Power 5 schools. The 3 guys that you're really going to miss: Jordan Bass, Sincere Edwards, and Rylan Gandy. And really, Edwards the most out of that. group. There's a lot of depth at cornerback here. And Gandy was just fine. Bass, I think they have really good linebackers, obviously, at Pitt, and Bass was a backup, although I think he's really good. I think they're going to miss him. It would be great. It would be much better to have him on the depth chart than not. But that's really what they lost. The biggest impact player they lost, the starter they lost, I mean, Gandy was a starter, but really the biggest impact player they lost was Sincere Edwards. You put him in this group, and it's a different look to have him in this defensive end group. Now, what they added, Kendall Stanley, likely starter on the offensive line. Blaine Spires, likely starter on the defensive line. Joey Zielinski, starter or two deep guy on the defensive line. Jaden Moore, starter or two deep guy on the defensive line. Andy Jean, probably going to be a starter, two deep guy at wide receiver. Jeff Percy and Keith Gouvier, more starters or two deep guys on the offensive line. Kavir Baines Marquez, likely two deep guy at safety. The other receivers, Deuce Spann and Blue Hicks, probably going to be two deep guys at wide receiver. I mean, I looked down this list, and I think most of the transfers Pitt brought in are going to play primary roles. So if you look at it, and this is an oversimplification as well, because it's not as simple as this. It's not as easy as this. There's more details and kind of caveats and background information that's relevant. But they really lost one prominent contributor, two starters, and a reserve, really, is what it came down to. And they added a bunch of guys who are going to play a lot this year. And so I think in that sense, it's a net positive. I think they brought in more than they lost in terms of the portal. They also lost seniors and so who moved on, who are out of eligibility. That's a different kind of story. But in terms of the portal, who they brought in and who they lost, I think is pretty. I do think it favors Pitt. I think it is a net positive for sure. We might have to cut it there because we've gone pretty deep into our 20-minute podcast. We're pretty close to a half hour. We got a few questions left, though. I'm going to hold on to those for next week just to give us a good place to start. There's some great questions there I want to get to. But thanks to everybody who submitted questions. Like I said, this is my favorite thing to do every week. This is my favorite episode of the Morning Pitt to do, this mailbag episode here on Friday. I feel like it's a great way to end the week, and hopefully you enjoy it as well. Make sure you stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com for all of our coverage from Pitt Spring Camp 2025, as well as the basketball transfer portal. When that starts up, we have a lot of coverage there at Panther-Lair.com. Also, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we have these daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show every Wednesday night. We have post-game shows, press conferences, interviews, all those kinds of things, highlights from spring camp. You can find it all at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and that way you won't miss any of it. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you've had a great week. It's been an interesting one for sure. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.